I'm going to tell you a story about the most horrific co-founder experience I've ever had. And I want to tell this story to you so you can think and take away some of the insights that I've gained and how much I've changed the way that I approach co-founders and the way that I advise startup founders when it comes to co-founders, because it's one of the most important decisions that you can make. And outside of not getting product market fit and not having enough money, co-founder issues is going to be the number one reason your startup folds. In fact, there are many startups that I know that have reached product market fit, have raised money, and have completely blown apart because of co-founder issues. And that's why investors look at co-founders very carefully. I ask, if I see someone else on the cap table, I make sure I find out everything about them. Y Combinator even goes so far as to find out what projects you've worked on in the past, because they understand if you do a shotgun wedding and you meet a co-founder right at some hackathon, or you just met someone in, I don't know, some type of startup event, and you say, here's half of my company, you're a co-founder, that can lead to disastrous results. And that's why understanding the dynamic between co-founders is so important. And hopefully you hear my story as a tale of caution. Welcome to Founder Fridays, where I get real and gritty, transparent and vulnerable. I skip all the introduction stuff. This is for my audience. This is for my community as I begin to share from the heart some of the experience I go through as I reflect upon my week of being an advisor, and different things pop up that trigger sort of memories. And I go, I think the rest of my community should listen to this. And that's the reason I want to talk about one of the worst co-founder experiences that I've ever had. Let me start off by saying that in no way, shape, or form am I crying victim. I'm taking full responsibility for my experience. This experience was my fault. I've gotten over it. I do not blame anybody else. I take it as lesson learned. I will never do that again. I will never go back there again. But I take responsibility for my choices, my contribution, my leadership when it came to that co-founder issue. Let's set this up. I am introduced to another founder working on a project. And that founder says, this is the problem that I want to solve. And I said, hey, I've got some ideas and I've got some assets that I think could help you. And I really just came on as an advisor, as a consultant. Then that founder asked me to invest in their company. And so I wrote a check, not a very large check, but I wrote a check. But also what I did is I sold intellectual property that I had that could help that startup. I sold that into the company. So I signed a contract and said, this intellectual property is yours. Use it to advance your startup. So far, so good. We're trucking along. It's always nice to make a little extra money on your intellectual property, have a bit of ownership. And if this startup goes unicorn, rocket ships to the moon, all the better. Then that founder starts experiencing some issues, and mainly because they're using my intellectual property. Now, here's a major thing that happens, that if you are the one that has to contribute, and if you get hit by a bus, all that intellectual property or the ability to deliver the product goes away. Now you've got some issues, you got some power dynamics. Well, those start to creep up. And guess what happened? This founder said, I'm not good at this. I'm not a good CEO. So therefore, I'd like you to come in as the CEO, offered me the position. I thought about it and I said, well, I'm already vested in this. I got tons of skin in the game. Okay, I'm going to be the CEO of this company. Now, this is where the next issue starts to rear its ugly head. It's a disparity around the expectations and the dreams and the desires of each founder. I was wired back then to build unicorn. I'm changed now, but back then I just want to build a unicorn. So if you brought me into a startup, I want to get it to the point where we're making $100 million a year and we're worth $1 billion. And therefore, you have to execute, you have to have an intensity of a startup. And this co-founder was not used to it. They came from a corporate background and had more of a traditional business background and identity. And therefore, the startup world was completely different. And immediately, we started having tension because I wanted to push, and this other founder was described as always having their foot over the brake. And this was a description given to me by the chairman of my board, saying this founder is not working really well because of this foot over the brake mentality, always cautious. And there were issues that were starting to crop up. And so this gap started to occur and it started creating tension. I should have asked right from the beginning. I just made assumptions right from the get-go that everybody wanted to build a unicorn. And guess what? Not everybody wants to build a unicorn. Not everybody is built to build a unicorn. And that's something that I should have taken into account, and you should too. Then we got seed funding. and we had to establish a use of funds. And this co-founder decided that they needed a big swanky salary because they brought in these certain skills, and the investor did not agree. They said, we don't need your position right now. We are not going to give you a salary. My salary was important, and they wanted to address that. But this co-founder, they were not going to pay for this co-founder to be a leader or anything like that. And that's another red flag. When the investor says, why is this co-founder even on your cap table? What do they contribute? Because let's go all the way back. I was the one who brought the intellectual property. I'm the CEO. I can deliver the product. The other co-founder just had the idea and had brought me in, therefore felt entitled to say, I get most of the ownership and this is my company. Which brings us to the next issue. I went on a vesting schedule and cliffs. For those you don't know, it happens where I said, if I'm not here in this company for longer than a year, I don't get any equity. At the year anniversary, I got 25% of my equity, and then every year after that, I started getting vesting. I started getting my shares of the company. So I had to be in the company for 4 years before I got 100% of my part of the startup. And we put all the employees on it. I brought on another co-founder, which I thought was extremely important. That was a workhorse that I had worked with before, and I said, we need to get this co-founder in. Well, the original co-founder said, I'm not giving up my shares. I'm entitled to the majority of the company. It was my idea, and that is a bad idea to entertain that idea, but I fell for it. I decided to go with it. So that founder, that original founder, did not go on a vesting schedule and cliff. Me and the other co-founders went on vesting schedule and cliffs, and I ended up giving my equity up to incentivize that other co-founder, the third one, to come to the table, because that's what good leadership does. I want to make sure that everybody's motivated to work equally hard as me. And remember, vesting schedule and cliffs, so I can fire them at any point in time. I can say, you're not going to have any of your shares, and we're out. So now the original founder is entitled to have the majority of the shares and is not on a vesting schedule. So the investors look at that cap table and say, this is really weird. This founder could basically hold the entire company hostage, hold the company over a barrel, and we ended up just fighting and fighting and fighting to the point where I offered that founder, I said, what do you want? I will get you cash and we will pay you out. And I offered the founder to walk with 9% of the company, which basically puts you right under that 10% co-founder status where I'd have to defend. And I could easily say, well, normally I give 5%, but because this founder brought me in and this founder made contributions, we're going to give them 9%. We settled, and I still had enough cap table room to get other investors. Now, to make matters worse, when we got that investment money in, I helped raise more investment. We started doing other things like crowdfunding, and I was the one pitching the investors. And that original founder was kind of like more like a, I don't know, ambassador. They wanted the title of president and founder. Now, I do not care about titles whatsoever, but it should have been another flag. I need to be president and I need to be known as the founder and you are the co-founder. And that's really weird. That sends so many funny signals to investors. But investors and the rest of the team, they started seeing this power dynamic happen and they started to defer to me and they said, Ed, whatever you want to do, that's what we're going to do. So here I am as a CEO of the company. I'm working with C Capital and I'm generating the revenue and I'm working really hard. I made so many sacrifices and I took major ownership. I own the company more than the original founder. That's how much work I was putting in. And I remember being on a phone call when I was all the way across the world and this founder says to me, we are sitting back here waiting for you to make the money. And I just about lost it. I almost threw the phone into the concrete. I remember sitting there listening to this going, WTF, I can't believe I just heard this from the majority shareholder, the one who's not on vesting schedule and cliffs. Now I'm starting to emotionally check out. Continuing along, now we're burning runway and I am not making any salary. I'm making all the money. I'm generating revenue for the company. The board is really happy. I got a good relationship with the board. I'm showing them the results and they're seeing cash flow come in. Nobody else is generating the revenue. The third co-founder is helping me generate the revenue, but nobody else is doing sales. I'm doing sales and delivering the product. So I am the performer. And I paid myself $1. I said, I'm going to pay myself $1. And I began giving out larger checks to the other founders and the other employees saying, I'm going to motivate you, because I was in a privileged position, and I don't complain about this whatsoever. I made that choice to say, I will pay myself $1, and I demonstrated this for the board, but I just want to know that I'll get options later on and I'll get credit for my $1 salary. And then I started to see runway issues. We were not reaching product market fit. We had raised substantial capital. We're talking six figures, multiple six figures of capital. And I start to see the writing on the wall. Now remember, I am a startup guy. I want to build a unicorn. I've done it multiple times. So I know when the writing's on the wall and there are signals and it's becoming an issue. So I went to the board and I said, we are not reaching product market fit. And I'm not going to raise more money because we're going to have to do a down round. And I've got investors that I'm talking to saying, what's wrong with your cap table? And there's not enough in there. So I'm talking to investors and I know the reality. So I'm trying to negotiate this other founder out, but we're not at product market fit. We have maybe about 8-9 months of runway, and that's dangerous. Usually you want to raise when you have 12 months of runway. If you get to 3 months of runway, you're never going to raise. So I started raising the alarm bells. Instead of raising capital, the alarm bells went off, and I rang that alarm bell, and I went to the board and I said, we are headed off a cliff. We cannot handle this anymore. So I propose that we take this company down to the studs. We basically figure out how to reduce our burn, eliminate all of the overhead. We get back to experimentation mode, and we get back to grinding and that hyper growth that's needed that other investors are going to look at us and measure us by before they make a commitment. Well, that did not go over well with this founder. And this founder went to the board and they said, I am going to take over this company right now, and basically got the board to vote me out. Or they pushed me to the point where I said, okay, if you're not going to do this, I'm not going to stand on a sinking ship and look investors in the eye as the CEO. You're going to have to take me out as the CEO and get me out. And that's what they did. But here's what happened. They sent me a letter because I had basically had some shares vested in ownership as a CEO, as well as my intellectual property. And they sent me a letter, and I remember getting this letter. This letter was from the board, and they said, Ed, your actions have been so destructive to the company. Our stock is basically worth a sub penny. That's the value. Now, what were they doing? They're basically sending me legal notice, and they were telling me, these are your actions. The board has decided, and I couldn't believe it. The board, I felt so betrayed by the board, but they were saying stock is sub penny because guess what? They want to claw back my stock without actually having to pay me anything. Now, truth be told, I would have given back their stock. I said, I will give you all the stock. But here's something that I wanted to negotiate. I wanted to be able to leave with some of my intellectual property, the intellectual property that I parked into this company and that only I could deliver. But you know what they did? They put it on the shelf. They said, no, you don't get to leave. You develop the intellectual property while you are here at our company, at our startup. Now, that was partially true. I had the intellectual property right in the beginning, but I sold it. And as I worked on it with company resources, they said, we have claim to it. I said, let's negotiate. I'll give you a percentage ownership. Just let me go on with my livelihood and let me keep going. And they said, no. They basically said, if we don't get to have it, nobody gets to have it. And I remember talking to another investor who was watching us. They went to that investor and said, Ed is going to be out. Can you please invest in this company? And he said, if Ed's out, I'm out. And we started talking. That's the thing. I've got the influence. I've got the social capital. I've got the credibility. So that investor's talking to me and saying, Ed, I told them, if you're out, then I'm out as well. And he told me, you know what? They're worried that you're going to go off and get rich without them. And in my mind, I'm like, that's my prerogative. You've got me out of the company. I'm going to leave, or at least do a deal with me, and I'll help you get rich. But if I'm going to do the lion's share work, I want the lion's share of ownership, and I'm ready just to move on. By that time, I was so emotionally burnt out, so many arguments and fights, and it was bringing up all my triggering, all my past social issues, my anxiety, everything, that I said, I'm ready to just completely walk. And guess what they did after that? They came back to me and said, we don't want you to walk. We want you to still own a percentage of the company. And they offered me percentage. And I said, no, I don't want it. But I did settle for 9% of the company because I didn't want to be a co-founder and I didn't want to be on that cap table in that way when everything fell apart. But if it did go well, at least I could get something out of it. Then the board did something really dumb. They brought in a CEO who has never been qualified CEO that was a family member of the original founder. We're talking conflict of interest left, right, and center. It was crazy. Now there's all this capital in the bank, and now I'm not talking to investors. I got no insight in them, and they basically make me sign a separation clause saying you're not going to talk about the company, you're not going to share the story whatsoever. And I said, fine. It needs to go both ways. They can't do anything about me, say anything about me. I can't say anything about them, and I'm ready to walk away. But meantime, they start asking me to train their new CEO and start developing their product, and I tried to help them out as much as I could, but then eventually I just said, this isn't worth it for me. And the other people they brought in to try and replace me, they were contacting me saying, this is totally asinine, this is dumb, I'm out. And it was just a vicious cycle of the company slowly swirling down into the abyss, into obscurity. And guess what? There's no more money in the company. Nothing is left. It's gutted. And my intellectual property is all locked up. And I basically have a clause in my contract. Now, I can go work and use it again after there's a release date. I think it was like 7 years, something like that. I'm coming up on that. But you know what? I don't even want to do that, because let's say I go out and do it. What prevents them, after the way they treated me, coming back after me saying, you know what? You've been holding out on us. We're going to sue you. We're going to create injunctions. So I basically let all that go. And pretty much, I don't know, 6 years of my life totally gone away, poof, in an instant. And I'm a better person because of it. I'm not complaining whatsoever, but I look back and boy, did I learn some lessons in terms of picking co-founders. And really, I was so traumatized by it because it brought up my issues growing up, all the stuff that you psychoanalyze that I went to therapy for. And that's how I ended up at startups.com, because I was listening to the Startup Therapy podcast. Highly recommend it, by the way. I'm going to create a link in the description so you can check it out, because Will and Ryan, the founders of startups.com, were having this no BS conversation about the emotional toll of being a founder. And I said, that's absolutely right. Someone else is talking about what I went through emotionally. And then I joined startups.com, and the rest was history. So what are your takeaways from this? Well, don't do shotgun weddings, and pick your co-founders very carefully. Vesting schedules and cliffs, but first and foremost, you need to do a gut check on what you need or what you want in a co-founder, and they have to be able to emotionally provide capacity. They may not work as hard as you, but they have to earn the potential of their ownership using vesting schedules and cliffs. And if you want to build a unicorn, you need to get that straight out on the table and make sure everybody's on the same page of not just building a startup, but how you build a startup. Because building a startup is very different than building a small business, and even more different, extremely different. I can't stress it enough, than working in a big corporation that's got shareholders and got millions of dollars of dry powder in a war chest. It's completely different than being a scrappy founder. You should constantly be looking to do projects together and develop a history where things get hard. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And do projects together where emotionally you go through some bumps, and watch the other founders. See if they will take responsibility, ownership, and go through that ride with you. If they're not, they should not be co-founders. On top of which, get your paperwork ready to say, if I fire you, you leave with 5% of the company. Or if you decide to leave on your own, you leave with 5% of the company, because you need that equity for future rounds of investment, future employees, future co-founders, if you're going to replace that co-founder. Never take anything for granted, and work on that relationship. And here's the final thing. One thing I realized is that co-founder never once said sorry, never once apologized for the piss poor attitude and all the agitation, irritation, and all the headaches that that founder gave me and the rest of the team. Never once took responsibility, and never, ever once apologized. And I apologized many times. I said, I didn't deal with that very well. I realized I got expectations. I'll get better. And I took responsibility for my part and change. But if that founder of yours, that co-founder, and this goes for team as well, can't take responsibility, can't take ownership, and can't reconcile relationships inside the company, guess what? You're done. It's not going to work, because startups are hard, and you will be in that position over and over and over again when someone's making a mistake. And that's the reason I do not pick co-founders just willy-nilly. I make sure that we go through a long dating process before we decide to get married and say we're going to take this to unicorn and go public, which takes about 10 years. So learn from my stories, watch some of these other videos, and every Founder Friday, I'm just going to keep sharing transparently, and I hope you stick around. feel free to do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, but also ask me questions of other stories or share your stories, and we can commiserate together. Because if I don't share my stories transparently and others aren't, then you founders out there, you're not going to know where to turn or what to expect. So we need to be more transparent, because this affects more than just the startups. It affects our mental health as well. And that's so important. So keep hanging around. I appreciate your support. Thanks for being part of the community. If you're from startups.com, I can't thank you enough. If you're not, check out startups.com, and I will see you in the next video.